What are these? Why were they important in the medieval time? And what are they for? These are medieval crotal bells. They're technically rattles rather than bells, but they were ever present in the medieval period. In fact, they predate the medieval period by quite a long way, potentially, although the best examples come from the beginning of the medieval period. One of the things that we can easily forget is that the medieval world sounded very different to what we're used to today. In the developed world right now, we've got the sound of aeroplanes, we've got the sound of vehicles driving along roads. There's an omnipresent hum of modern day noise in most places in the developed world, of course. In other parts of the world, there's silence. The medieval period was, broadly speaking, quite silent, except bells. These are crotal bells, which is a really unusual word. They are metal things with a metal P inside of them, and basically they hang from horse harness or from belts or from equipment in general and make a noise as you travel along. And this sound would have been very familiar to medieval people. In fact, in many cases it's thought that crotal bells rattling on horse harness were a warning to pedestrians to get out of the way. So they did potentially indicate some kind of status. And of course bells in general, open bells, which go back 4,000 years I'm sure and were invented probably in the earliest days of civilization, to now we actually have bells exactly like this used on heavy horse harness when they're pulling things for displays. So bells, as a way of making noise and drawing attention to yourself, are incredibly long-lasting component. These are a modern construction of crotal bell. They're made out of 2 pieces of tin. In fact, there's a wire as well, so 3 or 4 pieces. And they would have resembled the construction technique used in some of the earliest crotal bells we're aware of. And sometimes they were made in one piece as well, and made of a soft material called white metal, which has got a lot of tin in it, makes it flexible, and so they could be cast open and then they're closed and the P dropped inside. Around 1400, it appears that somebody came up with a unique way of casting crotal bells in one piece. And that's really interesting because it's an innovation, and it might have been to do with speed of manufacture, it might have been to do with the finish, it might have been to do with all sorts of different components. But the one piece casting became very, very popular. And what's interesting about that is that the P is held inside the casting by a lost wax process, by sand. The P itself is encased in sand, and then that's the inner part of the actual bell itself. And these circular components, which are often thought of as allowing the sound out, they're actually not. They're to do with the way that the one-piece casting would have needed to support the P in the middle. So these bits are actually allowing the sprue to be taken out. The shape of these, this open bit, which often people talk about being to do with sound, is actually to do with manufacturing. And interestingly, the first one-piece crotal bells that were manufactured with a seam around them, even though they didn't actually need a seam, because everybody thought of crotal bells as having a seam. One of the most popular uses for crotal bells was to hang from horse harness. And of course, I'm not on a horse right now, but I've got a horse, so I'm going to get on one and show you a couple of observations that I've come across about what crotal bells can and can't do for you when you're riding along. First and foremost, they tell everybody you're there. But there's a couple of other secret things that I've not really heard talked about before. Let me see if you agree with me. Good lad. Good boy. This is Ghost, one of my war horses in training. He's a Lusitano stallion, and he's not ridden with crotal bells before. We'll see how he goes. He's very keen, very fluffy because he's in his winter coat, and I'm going to do some experiments at different speeds just to see if I'm right. I think the bells will tell people at a distance what pace I'm doing, i.e. walk, trot or canter. So let's do some experiments and see whether you can tell from the noise the crotal bells make what speed I'm going, even if you can't see me. Walk on. I'm going to turn around now. Come on, good boy. And let's try a trot. Let's do that back the other way. Good boy. Trot on. Good boy. I think that's pretty clear, different sound. Good boy. I think you could probably hear the difference between a walk, which doesn't actually make the crotal bells sound very much, to a trot, which makes a regular noise like that. And if you weren't paying attention but you heard those sounds, especially the sound of a trot, I think you'd be able to tell that somebody was coming a little bit faster. Let's go up a gear. Let's go into canter, a nice steady canter, and let's see if that makes yet a different sound. I think it will do again, but see what you think. Come on then, let's have a nice canter. Good boy. So walking, you don't really hear too much. Trotting, you hear more. Canter. I think that's really interesting. I can definitely hear the difference, the beat of the sound of the bells. So with walking, you don't really hear too much. With a trot, it's, depending on how fast the horse is trotting. And with canter, it's, which means if you weren't paying attention, you could tell how quickly somebody was coming around the corner if they're on a horse. Isn't that interesting? And obviously the more bells you have on your horse, and depending on where they're placed on the horse, there'll be a different sound. There'll be more sound actually, rather than a different sound. It'll have the same kind of rhythm. So Ghost's been very good, but there was one further observation about crotal bells. It's a similar sound that armour makes when you're wearing armour on a horse. So any horse that's very familiar with the sound and the jingling of crotal bells, maybe they're halfway trained to carry a rider in harness. We know that horses wore bells on their bridles because there's a line in the Monk's Tale of Chaucer which talks about the jangling bells on the horse's bridle. Just a tiny little snippet of medieval life that proves they were a thing worthy of mention. So horses definitely wore them on their bridles. Now I'm holding these because in case there's a problem I can just fling them away and he can calm down. But if a horse is very used to it, you could just put these next to its ears. So you could imagine that this would serve both as a warning to other people because of the noise, but also it might drown out distracting sounds for the horse, and maybe just get the horse completely used to this constant jangling of their ears. Must be quite distracting, but I guess if they're used to it, they're used to it, and it stops them being disturbed by other noises that might suddenly happen in the medieval world. Who knows? I've not tested that out yet, but we do know that crotal bells were all over medieval harness. Good boy, you've done excellently. Who's a good lad? Good boy. Good boy, walk on. Good boy, eh?